In the year 2050, the Sun faces a destabilizing threat from dark energy, endangering all life on Earth with a potential ice age. Scientists propose a risky solution, utilizing an experimental stellar bomb payload equivalent in mass to Manhattan Island to purge the destabilizing forces and restore balance to the Sun. To undertake this challenging mission, the Icarus II spacecraft, equipped with advanced heat shielding and an advanced artificial intelligence (AI), is selected. Unfortunately, the initial mission fails. 7 years later, the Icarus II embarks on a second attempt. The crew comprises Dr. Robert Capa, played by Cillian Murphy, the physicist responsible for the critical calculations of the payload's deployment and detonation, Captain Kaneda, portrayed by Hiroyuki Sanada, a determined and focused mission leader, Mace, played by Chris Evans, an engineer offering a military perspective, Dr. Searle, portrayed by Cliff Curtis, the ship's counselor and medical officer, Cassie, played by Byrne, the pilot providing emotional support to the crew, Trey, portrayed by Benedict Wong, the tech-savvy navigator, Harvey, played by Garity, the communication specialist and first officer, and Corazón, portrayed by Yeoh, the botanist responsible for maintaining the oxygen garden crucial for sustenance and carbon recycling during the journey. After 16 months of travel, as the ship nears the Sun, an interference known as the Dead Zone disrupts radio communications with Earth. Surprisingly, the ship encounters the Dead Zone 7 days earlier than anticipated, leaving the crew with a mere 24 hours to compose final messages to their loved ones, encapsulated in a last packet. Capa struggles to find the right words and makes multiple attempts at his message, unknowingly consuming valuable time that belongs to Mace. This leads to a heated confrontation between Capa and Mace, resulting in lingering animosity despite Mace's subsequent apology. Searle intervenes, requiring Mace to spend time in the Earth Room, which recreates sensory experiences from their home planet. Following this, Mace apologizes to Capa, and they re-establish civility. During a crew meeting to discuss their progress, Corazón observes that although they are only 2/3 of the way to their destination, the Sun, the oxygen garden has been producing at a better-than-expected rate. Searle develops a fascination with observing the approaching Sun through the ship's viewport and wonders about experiencing the unfiltered view. The ship's AI, voiced by Chipo Chung, warns him that he can only tolerate 3.1% of the actual light, prompting Searle to request a 30-second exposure at that level. The outcome of this prolonged viewing has a profound effect on Searle, as he spends countless hours in the viewing room, repeatedly subjecting himself to the Sun's radiance. Captain Kaneda has been meticulously studying the video logs of Captain Pinbacker, played by Mark Strong, the former commander of Icarus I, in an effort to unravel the reasons behind the initial mission's failure. During his research, he plays a video in which Pinbacker casually describes a minor meteor storm that caused only superficial damage. This peculiarly nonchalant response puzzles Kaneda. As the spaceship approaches Mercury, Harvey detects a signal emanating from Icarus I's distress beacon. The signal is faint but amplified by the iron present in Mercury, leading Kaneda to believe that some of the Icarus I crew might still be alive. He shares this discovery with the crew and initiates a discussion about whether they should alter their current mission. Mace, however, expresses discontent with deviating from their primary objective of delivering the bomb, as it is of utmost importance. Dr. Searle acknowledges Mace's perspective but proposes that diverting to Icarus I could present an opportunity to carry a second bomb payload. This sparks further heated debate, which Captain Kaneda interrupts by deferring the decision to their nuclear physicist, Capa, who possesses the most expertise in such matters. He explains to the captain that he lacks sufficient information to make an informed and logical choice, suggesting that the best he can do is leave it to chance. When Kaneda asks, "So? Heads or tails?" Capa responds, "Heads. 2 last best chances are better than 1. Captain Kaneda accepts Capa's decision. Trey carefully plots the course, triple-checking its accuracy, and confirms his satisfaction with the calculations. Unfortunately, amidst numerous calculations, Trey overlooks the need to readjust the heat shield, which shields the ship from the Sun's radiation. The error is discovered when the ship's computer declares an emergency due to slight damage caused by Trey's oversight. Assessing and repairing the true extent of the damage requires venturing into space and working outside the ship. Captain Kaneda seeks a volunteer to accompany him. After declining the second-in-command's request to join him, Capa is nominated by Mace. Nevertheless, Capa accepts the implicit challenge, and Kaneda agrees to allow him to join him on the spacewalk. Captain Kaneda and Capa exit the spaceship wearing EVA suits to commence repairs. Sensing the need to shield them from direct sunlight, Cassie adjusts the position of the Icarus II, sacrificing the 2 communications towers that will be required for their return to Earth. As they revolve around the living quarters, the tips of the communication towers burn up intermittently when exposed to sunlight. The remaining burning fragments of the tower redirect a beam of sunlight towards the center of the ship, directly onto the oxygen garden. A fire ignites, initially manageable by the ship's systems, but it quickly spirals out of control, endangering not only the garden but the entire spacecraft. Amidst the chaos, Corazón rushes to her rapidly burning garden and requests access, hoping to save it. However, Mace, assessing the situation, realizes that the mission and the ship are at risk unless drastic measures are taken. He commands the computer to release all the stored oxygen in the tanks, intensifying the fire to such an extent that it will eventually extinguish itself. The prolonged exposure to the sun now endangers the 2 spacewalking astronauts, Kaneda and Capa, shielded by Cassie's maneuver. A power struggle ensues between Cassie and the AI, with Cassie resorting to an override command that requires authorization from a second crew member. Cassie turns to Mace, requesting his authorization code, but he refuses, firmly believing that the mission's importance surpasses the sacrifice of Kaneda and Capa. Desperate, Cassie implores Harvey, who promptly provides his authorization. Disagreeing silently with Mace's decision, Mace directly contacts Captain Kaneda, urging him to support him and override the orders issued by Cassie and Harvey. He instructs the AI to resume its corrective shading and proceed with the mission. As the shade protecting the 2 astronauts diminishes, Kaneda commands Capa to return to the ship while he single-handedly patches the final damage to the heat shield. Capa complies, and shortly after, Kaneda repairs the remaining damage, sacrificing himself to the intense exposure of the sun. With the loss of their oxygen garden, the astronauts are left with no choice but to intercept Icarus II. Trey, overwhelmed by guilt, is placed under close watch to prevent self-harm. Now alongside Icarus II, Searle, Capa, Mace, and Harvey board the ship, only to find a surprising abundance of food, a thriving oxygen garden, and a functional payload. However, the ship's computer servers have suffered extensive damage, rendering the ship immobile. In a disturbing video log, Pinbacker, now disfigured, reveals that the crew chose to abandon the mission, believing that humanity's impending destruction was a result of divine will. Furthermore, all crew members are discovered burned to death in the viewing room, as the protective filter had been turned off. As the crew investigates, the airlock connecting Icarus I to Icarus II is inexplicably destroyed, causing both ships to separate. They find a single EVA suit that would allow Capa to return to Icarus II, as he is the only one capable of deploying the payload. However, Harvey objects to Capa receiving the suit, citing his own position as the captain following Kaneda's death. Searle remains behind to manually open the shafts, while Harvey and Mace use the ship's insulation to protect themselves as they hold on to Capa, who is propelled towards Icarus II. During the perilous journey, Capa loses his grip on Harvey, who drifts off into the depths of outer space and freezes to death. His body disintegrates upon collision with the ship and incinerates once it leaves the protective heat shield. Mace suffers from frostbite but survives and quickly recovers. As Icarus II departs, Searle enters Icarus I's viewing room to prepare for his own demise. Corazón calculates the available oxygen supply and the amount needed to complete the mission. She determines that there is enough for 4 out of the 5 surviving crew members to survive until the payload is delivered. It is decided that Mace will eliminate Trey, but upon reaching Trey, Mace discovers that he has already taken his own life. In a fit of rage, Mace smears blood on Capa's hand, holding him responsible for Trey's death. Once again, a heated confrontation ensues between Mace and Capa, but it is short-lived due to the limited oxygen in the ship's environment. In the payload room, the AI informs Capa that there is still insufficient oxygen for all of them to survive until the payload is delivered. Capa mentions Corazón's calculations, suggesting that there should be enough oxygen for the 4 remaining crew members. However, the AI reveals that there are actually 5 individuals on board, with the 5th being in the viewing room. Capa rushes to the viewing room and discovers that Pinbacker is still alive. Severely burned and clearly psychotic, Pinbacker inflicts a wound on Capa's chest using a stolen scalpel and pursues him through the ship. Capa manages to reach the EVA suit room and locks himself in, but Pinbacker pulls the safety lever, trapping Capa inside. Pinbacker then removes the ship's computer servers from their coolant, mirroring his actions on his own ship. In the charred remains of the oxygen garden, Corazón discovers a single seedling sprouting rapidly from the scorched soil, providing her and the mission with a glimmer of hope for survival and the possibility of returning to Earth. As she calls for Capa and Cassie to join her in the room, Pinbacker brutally kills her. Meanwhile, Mace enters the cooling unit to repair the Icarus II's mainframe by immersing himself in the coolant. Unfortunately, he becomes entangled in the machinery, sustaining a leg injury that causes him to bleed and ultimately freeze to death. Pinbacker relentlessly pursues Cassie, who seeks refuge in the front of the ship, near the nuclear payload. Trapped in the EVA suit room, Capa engages in a conversation with Mace before his demise. Despite his agony from the freezing coolant, Mace instructs Capa that he must manually detach the nuclear payload from Icarus and pilot it directly into the sun. Determined to fulfill the mission, Capa escapes the room by equipping an EVA suit, using a welding torch to puncture the inner door and releasing the outer airlock door. Loose objects in Corazón's lifeless body are expelled from the ship, granting Capa access. He successfully separates the payload and proceeds to the ship's front hatch. As the payload and Icarus II drift apart, Capa employs the propulsion unit of his EVA suit to navigate towards the payload. At that moment, the payload's thrusters ignite, causing a partial incineration of Icarus II. The remaining portion of the ship succumbs to fire and ultimately explodes. Capa enters the payload, assuming the task of manually piloting and initiating the ignition process. Inside, he discovers Cassie hiding, and the two face off against the deranged Pinbacker. In a fierce struggle, Capa manages to break free from Pinbacker's grip. Ultimately, Capa successfully ignites the payload, triggering the onset of a nuclear reaction. As the sun looms ever closer, Capa finds solace, embracing his impending death and fixating his gaze upon the flames of the sun. Back on Earth, Robert Capa's sister, accompanied by her children, finds herself in a snow-covered park. She watches the final message sent to her by Capa. A radiant sun pierces through the clouds over a frozen Sydney harbor, signifying the mission's triumph.